Well, if one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection most, and listens to their testimony. Ask any Mexican, any Puerto Rican, any black man, any poor person. Ask the wretched how they fare in the halls of justice, and then you will know, not whether or not the country is just, but whether or not it has any love for justice, or any concept of it. It is certain, in any case, that ignorance, allied with power, is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. James Baldwin. Hey guys, it's Tay of ShawntePlans, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This week I'm participating in the Black Lives Matter Planner Challenge that was created by Queen Fancy Plans and Katie Did Plans. And the challenge was to do a complete black and white spread and include quotes and images pertaining to the Black Lives Matter movement. I selected a quote from James Baldwin and read the full quote at the beginning of this video, and I'm going to have an abbreviated version of that quote included in this spread. As I'm sitting down to do this voiceover, it's funny, I didn't realize this was going to be kind of as emotional and difficult prior to sitting down and actually beginning to speak. I've been getting a lot of questions and inquiries regarding what it's like to live as a Black person in America as people are begun to educate themselves and inquire more about what it's like. And I thought I would take this opportunity in this video to just kind of talk. My experience is mine alone, and I think that's one of the things that can be most unfortunate and difficult for Black people, because when you are a part of a minority group, one of the things that is common is oftentimes the actions of one person are attributed to the entire group, which is just so inaccurate. My lived experience, while I certainly have some things in common with other lived experiences of Black people, is individual, just as everyone's life experience is individual to them. And so I would not suggest that I would be able to speak for all Black people. No one could take on that position. But for myself, I absolutely have to say that it's been a very interesting week. The thing that's been the most interesting for me, because this is something that has continued to happen over and over in the Black community, the murder of Black people, the harassment, the policing of our bodies instead of our cities and neighborhoods by police, and to have the justice system support the police and not support the people who are outright saying that the things that are being done to us and the crimes that are being perpetrated against us are going unhindered, unchecked, and no one is doing anything about it. That's the thing that can be so frustrating, because it's one thing to know that you murdered a person, and I think everyone can see that, say that's wrong, clear-cut murder, bad. What becomes then infuriating after that is the response, because what Black people have had to deal with for so many generations is that it was fine. You could just get away with killing Black people. There weren't any consequences, especially if you were a cop. And so, and honestly, George Zimmerman proved you didn't even have to be a cop to get away with murdering a Black child. And so what then becomes infuriating when you are a Black person is knowing that there are everyday terrorists running around through your nation, whether they're wearing police clothes or plain clothes, and you are aware that the value of your life doesn't amount to much of anything. And I think for me personally, I knew I'd been changed the moment I was watching the news, and it was during the Trayvon Martin incident when George Zimmerman was on trial. And I remember hearing media coverage of it. And as I was listening to what they were saying, it dawned on me they were explaining to me why that little boy had to be murdered. And I turned off the TV because I could not believe what I was hearing, except that I could because sadly, those are the things that you get to a point where you've gotten used to as a Black person in America, of being undervalued and just knowing they don't care. That incident with Trayvon Martin really broke my heart in so many ways. I don't know that I ever really emotionally completely recovered from that, and I don't know if I ever really will. And then the pattern just kept repeating over and over with so many different people. And so bringing it to the George Floyd situation, for me, the thing that struck me the most is the response, because in so many situations prior to George Floyd, the response had been silence. And that's what has been so different lately, was just seeing so many people stand up and say, okay, we see this. It was outright murder. It was outright wrong. Something has to be done. And I think that's the thing that is that has been so unique about this situation, because for Black people, the murder itself was not the thing that was different. The response to it is what is different this time. And I think, unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 situation, in which everyone is kind of stuck at home and life as usual is not functioning as usual, people were in a position where they had more time to be aware of what was happening, because it's just a fact, if this is not your culture, if this is not your lived experience, there's just a lot about being Black in America that you just wouldn't know. And so it has been really interesting just to see people want to know more, to go out and educate themselves and be interested in finding out what it is like to live as a Black person in America. My husband works in mental health, and so I think often about the impact that the lived Black experience has on our mental health. Dr. Joy DeGruy wrote a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and she's amazing lectures regarding that book on YouTube. And it's really fascinating because she gives such a great history and an in-depth insight into the trauma that Black people endured and how it shaped generations of Black people in America. There was a lab experiment that was done on lab rats in which they I forget what the particular object was that the rats were responding to, but they were treating them with negative stimuli. And so it was sort of negative reinforcement, and the rats were injured every single time they went towards the stimuli. And so not what they found was, after a certain point of constantly enduring the pain, not only were those rats no longer responding to that stimuli, but they saw that there was a change in their genetics, and so their offspring also wouldn't respond. And it was such an interesting thing, and I remember her saying that because it's a very common statement and one that is essentially accurate, that, you know, slavery was a long time ago, and, you know, Black people are certainly not enslaved, unless, of course, you watched Ava DuVernay's The 13th on Netflix, in which you saw how the 13th Amendment was written to ensure that that you could still have a slave labor force in America. You just don't call them slaves, you call them criminals. And it is amazing what you are able to then do to people once you label them a criminal. So but getting back to the point I was making, the emotional and psychological trauma that Black people endured for so many generations, and things that have been passed down without any sort of therapeutic healing or any sort of corrections, because I think sometimes people underestimate the amount of trauma that Black people live with and have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I think there is a little bit of understanding to it, because in America, we had the 9/11 situation in which a lot of people understood that, there was an imminent threat and terror right after 9/11 happened, and the fear of knowing, something could happen that could take my life or the life of someone I love, and this situation is completely out of my control. I cannot stop a terrorist from doing something that could potentially cause harm to me or my family members. And the difference in that situation was action was taken. Whether you agree or disagree with the actions that followed the wars and all of that stuff, it's not so much that being the point. It's the fact that action was taken. And that's the thing that becomes something. You don't expect action to be taken. If you're a Black person in America, you can hope for change, but you really aren't expecting it. And maybe I shouldn't say as Black people, because I said at the beginning of this, I wasn't going to speak for us as a group. I'm speaking for myself. It is absolutely why I cried when Obama became president. I didn't expect it. I don't have high expectations for justice or equality of America, because I have been let down over and over and over again and have been disappointed. I am someone who wants to believe in the ideals and the things that are espoused in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, in our justice system, in our government. And for me, that's where I see structural racism and the things that truly need to be changed. I think oftentimes racism is reduced to emotional statements and people saying the N-word or doing things that come across as small prejudices or racisms. And what's most damaging to Black people is certainly not being called a name. It is literally the construct of America in which the housing, the medical, the educational systems are all set up to ensure that Black people live a lifestyle that is subpar. And for people who live in food deserts and don't have access to healthy foods and are struggling with all sorts of preventable health issues and things like that, people who are undereducated and don't have opportunities to better their lives and further their lives, and situations in which Black people who one left alone after slavery was over, during the Jim Crow era, who built up Black Wall Street, who built up cities that were prosperous and built up areas that were prosperous. And then those areas were specifically targeted by white people, and they came through and burned it to the ground to ensure that Black people would not be able to have their own setup system in which they could function in a way that would allow for equality. Those are the things that when I'm discussing racism, for me, those are the things that are a problem. It has nothing to do with being caught up in the emotion of someone calling someone the N-word or things like that. Those types of arguments are reductive and dismissive of the true issues of bigotry and prejudice in this country, and people use them so that they don't have to deal with the much harder and much more difficult things that need to be changed, like our justice system and our legal system. And then we get into conversations about privilege. And again, this is just my personal opinion. Privilege is something that is not assigned to you by yourself. You do not give yourself any of the privileges that you have that are attained by certain attributes that you have. And everyone has some form of privilege based on whatever attribute it might be. And so the thing that comes into play when you have privilege is not so much to feel guilty about it or feel like you have to apologize for it. From my perspective, it's do something good with it. If you have a set of privileges, use them to help better the lives of yourself and of others. That's the only way in which you can use privilege, because again, you can't get rid of white privilege in America. It's a thing, it's a fact, it exists. And so since it is there and it does exist, don't be afraid of it, don't run from it, don't apologize for it, utilize it. Because anytime you have some sort of advantage, you can do some good with it. And I think that's something that I definitely feel like I've seen people just sort of try to shy away from because there's sort of a guilt associated with it. But I don't see why, because we don't assign privilege to ourselves. And so I think that there are a lot of actions and things that can be done in this country to help make real and sustainable change. For myself, I'm still educating myself on those things. I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers for what it takes to go forward. I do think having honest and open conversations, I do think having an opportunity where people are listening and people are showing that they care is just so important. And that's what has been so great about what's happened, and what I've loved seeing happen in the planner community is just an outpouring of caring. And so I definitely want to say thank you to those who have expressed how much they care for Black lives and have been bold and been proud to say that Black lives matter. I appreciate you. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you're all having an amazing day and staying safe. Thank you for caring. See you next video. Bye. I'm telling these tears, go and fall away, fall away. Oh, may the last one burn into flame.